All right, today I'm excited to have, I don't even know how to put words to it. I think most of you know Hal Koerner, know of Hal Koerner, and I know that it's a little bit different than who we normally have on because we normally are celebrating these sort of like no podium runners, as we call them, the ones who do it just because they love it. But that generation of no podium runners was really born out of what I think the generation that Hal was at an elite level from, let's say, 1999 to 2013, 2014. And the body of work that he had and the way that he was doing it is actually very similar to how we're out here doing it now. And so we look back at sort of like this gritty runner who's in it because they clearly love it, whether they're actually standing on a podium or not. Uh, that's sort of the runner that we celebrate. And so today it's fun to have Hal with us, and I'm excited to get to know you, Hal. But first off, thank you and welcome to the podcast. Thank you.
Hey, thanks for having me on. It's certainly a pleasure. Of course, it's great to talk about uh, the good old days, if you will. Younger
Yeah,
days, those are nice to
yeah,
talk about too.
yeah, man.
Um, but just like you said, I mean, the real passion that I had for the sport was really just being out there and finding
Yeah,
that grit and getting to the finish line. So I
yeah,
hope throughout our conversation, I think all your listeners will be able to have, a little commonality in
yeah,
there.
man. I mean, so clearly where you come from, and just watching you, like I literally my ultra running career, let's call it a career, started when my good friend Jeremy passed Unbreakable across the table on DVD to me, and that thrust me into the this obsession with the 100 miler. But just even the way that you were doing it, I mean, maybe Killian, wearing the white spandex, he was European, and he was already like in this, like Europeans were already in this place where the sport was quite developed, professionals and all that sort of stuff. But you, Jeff, and Anton were just, maybe you can give me a better word if this isn't a good word, but I mean it as a compliment. You were sort of dirtbag runners who just loved it, clearly loved it.
Yeah, yeah, no question. Well, we were definitely addicted to running,
Yeah,
and to a large extent, yeah, the lifestyle. Some of
yeah,
us went about it a little differently. Some of us had different means.
sure.
There was that was kind of the boom of not commercialization, but just the awareness
Yeah,
of the sport. And Unbreakable really was that was a stepping off point, I think, for the sport, no question.
yeah,
It was huge. And then you had the mastery of like how the event unfolded made it so watchable. Like today, I still have a hard time watching these, uh, live streams of all the different events. I love
yeah.
it, but at the same time, like, can people really watch this all day long? And even though it
Yeah,
was a much shorter format, even at the time, I didn't think anybody, so
yeah.
kudos to JB for seeing that, a
Hmm.
little
Oh, way ahead of his time. I mean, that
different.
documentary was an hour and 45 minutes. And
Yeah.
even, the other, I think another sort of like landmark documentary of the one about the race in Tennessee, the race that eats its young. I'm blanking on what it's called.
The Barclays, or
Yeah,
yeah, well, thank you.
Barclays.
Sure.
That was clearly a landmark moment as well, but that was a developed era of documentaries. I think Unbreakable proved that people can sit for a long time and look at people just run.
Yeah, without a doubt. And there's a compelling story, and hopefully the characters are compelling. And whether those
Yes.
characters are at the front of the pack or the back of the pack, as we know,
Yeah.
those stories are what I think people tune in for, without a
Yeah.
doubt. And it relates. Everybody's able to relate to someone, and really, that's kind of how I saw myself getting into the sport. Was I could relate to other people. I could be in an event. I could see the people coming across the finish line, and I could say, I
Yeah.
can be one of those people.
Well,
If
that
I
that's the perfect segue. How, I mean, for you, what was your version of Unbreakable? I mean, most of the sport now, there's Unbreakables in our story. You were in Unbreakable, so what was yours in the late '90s?
That's a great question. The the sport, yeah, was pretty. I mean, it was it wasn't underground, but it was a hard sport to try to break into, let alone like just doing it, right? I mean, the
Right.
feat of it, seeing
Yeah.
where your body could take you. My what really got it going was, and it's hard for me to. My dad was friends with a group of guys that had, they were in the mountains, they were trail running, they were running, they were triathletes, they were doing all these events in Colorado, and obviously the
Okay.
Leadville 100 was kind of like that pinnacle
Yeah.
ultra out
Yeah.
there event, and he helped pay some of those guys, and I do remember him like doing these nighttime runs in Leadville, and that was it's
Really?
just super intriguing to me. Like they would train at night, long distances, and even and then that was prepping them for the race, and I thought that was pretty
Mm.
wild. And at the time,
Yeah.
my dad was doing lots of marathons and doing
Okay.
century bike rides, and it really didn't. I don't know. It didn't really click for me in that regard. I loved being in the mountains, whether it was skiing or hiking or doing 14ers, and
Hmm.
that kind of parlayed into it. But I can vividly remember being in a runner's roost in downtown Denver, and I saw an ultra running magazine, and it was like this black and white magazine. I picked this thing up, and it was like fumbling through this thing, and it was, I don't know, that kind of just ignited a spark. And there was 180 people or something were finishing Leadville, and I thought I'm gonna be one of those 180 people.
Wow.
That I mean, and
Eh,
that was kind of it. And I was running, and I was running. I had a 3 mile loop I started doing in like jean shorts. And then I did that for a few months. And I had a 7 mile loop that I did for another 3 months. And then it went to 10 miles. And I did that for
Yeah.
like another 3 months. And that was really, that kind of got me going. But to
Wow.
develop it even more, once I got into the sport and once I found a few trail races, it was just a small community. There weren't a
Yeah.
lot of people. It was a lot of friends that, of my dad's, and I would show up in events, and they would help bring me along and give me pointers and just be encouraging. and
Yeah.
and then at the end of the races there were people right there, and that was really the feeling for me. It was a community of, like, obviously the elation of doing these things and the training
Yeah.
and seeing the rewards of it, but hanging out in the Rocky Mountains all day long was,
Yeah.
that was enough for me too. So
So is that where you grew up? Did you grow up in Colorado or Oregon?
yeah, I grew up south of Denver,
Oh,
in Parker, Colorado. It was a
got
much
it. Yep.
smaller town,
Yeah.
and I went through all my schooling in Colorado,
Got it.
um, and and thinking about it now, living in Oregon, I mean, we were talking about it last night. It was really hard to get to the trails, actually, and living in the suburbs of
Mm.
Denver. You didn't do that a
Yeah.
whole lot, and then having the chance to go race in the mountains is really the reward. Like I would train
Yeah.
on there was a time where I worked at a health club in Denver, and I would run 10 miles on the treadmill in the morning, and I'd go run 10 miles around a reservoir at night, mimicking nothing that
God.
was close to a trail run, you know,
Yeah.
let
Yeah.
alone, the elevation gain. It's kind of funny. And
Yeah.
so it took it, that was really it for me. I was so psyched to get out there and be able to, relish in that,
Yeah.
just
I
in
mean,
that
there's
environment.
not to be negative about Denver, so maybe I'll say to be positive about Salt Lake City, where I live, is like the branding that Denver get has is sometimes is really, I think, the branding that Salt Lake City deserves, because
Right.
I'm downtown right now and I can be on a stretch of the Wasatch 100 Trail in 15 minutes from right now. Like we get this city life and this world class trail experience. So I'm very lucky, because when I hear like that, yeah, your Denver experiences, your training you can't do like specific training to the race that you were going to do.
Right. And it took, yeah, I mean, yeah. And I don't think it's gotten better. I mean, just for where I was, I mean, it's
Yeah,
busier, getting
yeah,
into the high country is a little bit harder.
yeah,
Kudos to the people that can live in, right on the interface and live in places like Boulder and,
totally.
green in places, but not everybody can be at that, right
Yeah,
there. So,
yeah,
but yeah, I do love Salt Lake does have the, access is quick, so much quicker,
it's
to the
nice.
mountains. And I
Yeah,
guess that was really for me too a turning point in my career was moving to Ashland, where
mm,
I just could leave my house and be 2,000 feet up in
yeah,
4 miles, and it's just right here. And I thought of all the miles that I used to use, on a treadmill or running around a bike path, or certainly
yeah,
I was getting fit, but it just didn't translate exactly um, to what I was always doing. And so
yeah,
luckily for me, I had the, you know, I loved going to races. I had that exposure. I was doing a lot of them. I was taught by some really terrible, the mentors I had. When you flip through Ultra Running magazine, and in one issue you would see that, like a Scott Jurek or an Ian Torrance or Courtney
Yeah.
Campbell or somebody's already run, like they were filling up every race in the magazine, and I was like, how are you guys running
Doing
all
them
these
all.
races from a month or 2 month,
Yeah.
publication? And that was really, I was like, well, this must be what you do. And that kind of started it. And so
Yeah.
I had the time on my legs, and I had that experience going for me, but it
Hmm.
still was a long process to get to the point where
Yeah.
I felt like I was up there, with those elites. So it's,
Yeah, for
and
sure.
that's, I think that's a message I try to tell everybody. It doesn't just happen overnight. And
Yeah.
there's so many hours, as put into something you love this much.
Yeah.
And you bleed it and you breathe it and you eat it and you sleep it. And I think that's really, it'll take that to get to the finish line of one of these things.
Yeah.
You know, uh, I haven't been able to be as consistent as I used to be, and like my mind is
So
still there. And I'm like, oh,
yeah.
I can just go out there and be able to do these things, and you can't. I can't anymore. But I have to think back to like what was the devotion? How much time did I put into this? And it's easy now to overlook that and to think about how many miles you and time
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Were
set
you a
aside for it.
competitor in high school in any sports? Like were you already in this mindset?
Yeah, well, that was the thing. I think the endurance part of it was uh, my dad and I would do longer bike rides, and he exposed me to like 5Ks and 10Ks. I love sports in general, and so
Yeah.
I played almost every sport. Thinking back on it now, yeah, my affinity for statistics, and like I had baseball cards and I knew everybody, I knew all the players, I knew
Yes.
what they
Yep.
did, and that really helped translate to when with the running. I saw where the events were. I knew the times. I knew the players. I knew what they did. It was easier to like, I think, analytically think like, okay, well, this is how much time I'm going to spend. These are the miles I'm going to do, and this is how I'm going to go
Yeah.
about this. And it helped me,
Yeah.
I think, be a part of it before I was even in it, and
Yeah.
that helped a lot. But I was very competitive and like to a fault. I have two kids who they're still, I see the perfectionism in them, and there was a
Yeah.
lot of that in me, and
Yeah.
so that helped. That certainly helped, I think, but
Yeah.
it could be a
Well,
blessing and a curse.
yeah, absolutely. So I'm 41 now, and so I when I was way into sports, like in the 90s, there was a lot more, let's say, shit talking going on between in the professional and probably still to this day. The Giants hate the Dodgers. They're not gonna at the beginning of a game. They're going to be talking shit. They're going to shake hands at the end.
Yeah.
My main knock with competitive ultra running today in the elite realm is that
Mm,
they're just all so nice to each other, and that's fine. I'm curious, like when you're lining up at Western in '07, what's it
yeah.
like at the starting line compared to now?
Oh, I bet it's pretty similar. I would
Is
tell you,
it?
it's like that correlation between like the basketball players now. They all are friends in the off season and they text each
Yes.
other and all the things too. Um,
Yeah.
I felt like we were, you know, I learned a little bit from Scott Jurek going up the escarpment once, and I remember another runner had kind of tucked right in behind him, like a quarter of a mile at the start of a 100 miler, had already tucked in behind him. And I remember he turned around and he was like, "Get off my ass!" Like right to the guy right as it started. And I was like, "Well, okay, that's fair."
Yeah.
And I think in some of the bigger races, like let's say '07 Western States, I can look back on it now and think I was in more of a mental zone. Like I was so supremely focused that I wasn't like being competitive with anybody else. I just felt like there wasn't this was my race. I was going to do it myself.
Mm.
I was going to have other outside factors try to dictate what was going to happen to me. And
Yeah.
I was going to run my own race from the start. And that was really pretty powerful. And I was
Yeah, I
able to
bet.
carry that on for a while through a number of the big hundreds to where you gained that much confidence. It was like, okay, I can be in my own world. I know everybody else out there is training, but I don't have control over them and I have control over me. So I think that was pretty key.
Yeah, you
But
could be in your own world, own mind.
yeah, but
Yeah.
I lived for going to the races for that moment to be with with my peers. in
Yeah, I
a
bet.
weird way, you know. And it was,
Yeah.
of course, you're measuring yourself and all the training and everything else. But I lived to go out there and be with those guys and to hang out with them
Yeah,
afterwards, and
I bet.
you know, to train, to do training blocks. You know, it
Yeah.
changed when I moved to Ashland later, with the younger kids who moved here and worked for me. Like the way we all trained in that regard, there was still some
Hmm.
secrecy, there was still some egos, you
Yeah.
know. But in general, you know, the feeling of pushing each other when we were out there was huge, and I never had that in Denver. There weren't, you know, there weren't
Hmm.
many people to go to train with, you know. And if I was training with someone, I was training with someone like twice my age, you know, who
Right.
were great runners, you know, and they were living busy professional lives, and you know, then we'd meet on the weekend and do certain things, but it was so different, right? And you know, I guess that also helped me to, you know, really cherish having a core group of peers that were my age. You know, we were
Yeah.
pretty, it was a pretty tight group. And I think now you have, luckily with, you know, Unbreakable and the commercialization and the runners and the internet and everything else, the runners now, the pool is so much greater. You know, the
Yeah.
talent is so huge, and you're bringing in all these kids. And for whatever reason, they find themselves into ultra running. I think that you have got to, at your purest sense, you have got to love this sport, because the
Yeah.
suffering, the time spent doing it is unlike,
Yeah.
you know, anything else. So I think that uh, there's a lot of bonding and camaraderie that can be found in that type of suffering too. So, and
Yeah.
I really, I appreciate seeing that from the younger generation as well. I mean,
Yeah.
these training
That's good.
groups were, I think that's the way it has to happen. You know, we always, when I was in Seattle, there was a core group of people, and it was like, oh, people in Boulder are doing their thing, and we were in Seattle, and there were a few people in Southern California, and then
Yeah.
East Coasters were their own set of deal. You know, I didn't
Yeah.
venture too far east to the Rockies,
Yeah.
and then moving to Ashland, we had a core group. So I enjoy seeing these guys, you know, living together, working together, and you know, I think that's what's going to help the sport out at the end of the
Yeah.
day. You'll see
That's
times
good.
really get pushed.
Yeah. So
Flagstaff.
when you jumped into the 100-mile distance, was the bear your first?
Yeah.
Uh, I mean, how did you?
Well,
So for people who listen to this podcast, I have a lot of Utahns, and we love the bear. The bear is super iconic. It's now at the point where it's like a 500 person wait list for
yeah,
this year.
that's
Uh,
amazing.
you ran it year one and won it. I think with maybe 25 other runners I saw. But
Yep.
you won it the first what 4 or 5 years?
Yeah. And it was, yeah, I mean, the growth was, it wasn't that astronomical then either. But
Yeah,
I
right.
remember, yeah, at the award ceremony, there was like 17, 18 people. And you can't, like, super, I mean, that's family at that point. You know, you had done
Yeah,
something with these folks, and we
yeah.
were doing something new. And I really cherish that. That course, even today, I've been on most of the new course, but the old
Uh-huh.
course just held. It just, you were so out there. That was the thing for me.
Yeah.
I just cherished being out there in the middle of nowhere. It was really homegrown in so many ways. You know, you'd show up at Leland's Fish Farm, and I didn't even know what a fish farm was, to tell you the truth. And you know, so informal, just a sheepish, quiet guy. I was just like, okay, these are the flags. You'll follow these.
And
Get
that
some rest, you know. And it was like, and he would be marking the course while I was running. It'd be at mile 25, and he'd be out there like marking the course as we were going. You know, like,
Are
and
you
many years
serious?
he ran it with me. You know, that was the crazy thing too. But
That's great.
yeah, to see the growth of it. Obviously, Utahns are, you know, they're athletic, outdoors
Yeah.
people. You know, they're psyched on, and I love to see that.
Yeah.
But you know, the going back to that day was really hard. I trained for the Pikes Peak Marathon, was one thing I was training for a ton, and I rolled my ankle really bad before it. Um, and I got through it, and then the bear came up, and then the first 5 miles we were going across like a cow pasture. We were moving through like barbed wire fences. You had to take the fence off. Cows were running by us,
Yeah.
you know. And I went right into this hole, and I went right into this hole, and I wrecked my ankle, and it was like swelling
Uh,
up. And I couldn't believe it. Well, by mile 90, it was done. So and my dad was pacing me. I probably walked the last like 12 miles, and it was like not even a walk. It was like it just dragged my leg behind me, and
yeah.
I was bleeding at that point, and it was like, well, I guess I'm gonna finish this. You know, I'm gonna finish this thing, and
Yeah.
that was it. I guess it taught me a lot. You know, that was huge. That no matter what, you have to get through these things. And
Yes.
I felt like I
Yes.
was definitely going to finish. It was not how I ever envisioned it happening. And like, there wasn't a whole lot of glory with walking downhill for 10 miles, like
Yeah.
limping your leg.
Yeah.
And you can imagine a lot of things were said, a lot of things weren't said, a
Sure.
lot of stuff was
Right.
bottled up.
Yeah.
So, um, that definitely helped. Like we joked later, like, well, it could never get worse than this, so I might as
Yeah.
well try this again. So
That's great. That was year one?
yeah, that was year one.
Yeah. Yeah, because I saw the
You,
winning time. Year one was like 25 hours.
yeah, 25 hours. And I was probably on a little bit better pace than that. Who knows how it should have unfolded for me. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
I was in pretty uncharted territory, but
Yeah.
yeah.
And speaking of uncharted territory, like the late 90s, 2000s, were runners living off of their running? Like I think of now,
Uh-huh.
like anyone who's winning Western States, they might have a contract with Hoka that they can at least survive off of. Did you have a day job? What were you doing?
I had a day job. I was going to school. I had a day job. Yeah, I was doing all those things.
Wow.
There wasn't much time for anything else.
Yeah.
And that was really, um, yeah, I'm trying to think if there could have been anybody. I just remember like Scott and Carl and Ian and those guys. And when Montreal like had just pretty much started around that
Wow.
time, and
Yeah.
there were a few people. I mean, but I still remember like you were psyched to get some shoes and maybe a
Yeah.
race entry. And
Yeah.
same thing, if you showed up in an event, somebody might buy your meal afterwards, or like pooling together for a hotel room, or those guys. When I met Scott and Ian, I went down to the Catalina 100K, and I remember riding over on the ferry over there, and like a young Luis Escobar was on the boat, and he came over and he was just like, hey, where are you from? Oh, you're from Colorado? And I just remember he's like, yeah, well, Coloradans don't do too well in California. And like he was kind of razzing me. And I showed up uh, at the registration. This was kind of fancy for back then, and I remember Scott and Ian were there trying to sell Montrails. And I was like, well, I'm wearing Montrails tomorrow. And I remember they were demoing to an extent, and they were like, where are you from? I'm like, Colorado. Which race are you running? And I was like, oh, I'm running the 100K. And they were like, good luck out there tomorrow. And then I was like, yeah. And Scott, I still vividly remember, and I give him grief all the time, he was like, oh, and what's your name? And I was like, oh, my name's Hal. And he's like, I'll try to remember that. And then I think in some weird way that was in my head like all day. And like luckily it was the last year, and I beat Ian's course record that
Yes.
day. And
Yes.
that's when
That's great.
Ian was like, hey, well, would you like to be on this team? So it was the right place, right
Yeah.
time. Like I don't know how any of that else would have happened, but that was also that helped me out a ton. But that was just like I would
I
get
love that.
shoes that I would run into the ground, get a couple pairs of
Yes.
shoes. I'm sure Scott and Carl in those early days that was the beginning of
Yeah.
someone trying their best to make something happen. But it still took years before anyone was living off of, you know,
They're running. They're ultra running.
yes, yes, definitely. And you have
When you're
to,
at the starting line, like what gear? I mean, I talked to the founders of Wasatch at length. I really enjoyed the conversation. Like, hey, in the late '70s, were you really duct taping water to your hands? And like, yeah, we were really duct taping water bottles. What was the gear like? Even in '07, maybe '99, in that range, like what were you just borrowing road gear and trying to convert it and engineer it?
oh, without a doubt. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I had like, I had these fanny packs that, I don't even know what they could have been used for, to tell you the truth. And
That's
the
great.
clothing, yeah, clothing that was chafing like crazy. Luckily it wasn't too bad.
Yeah.
But you learn to deal with, one or two handhelds. Like there was no vests. Um,
Right.
the fanny packs were bouncing all over the place. You were trying to
Oh,
just
just
customize
killing
everything as best you could. Yeah,
you.
Gatorade bottles with duct tape. Um, you had these old hard plastic UD bottles with like um, tire bike tubes, over the top. So I mean, it's kind of funny now when you look at
Yeah.
we sell them for $60 now. A
Right.
water bottle with some
I
nylon
know.
strapping to it. So
Yeah.
it's come a long way.
Yeah.
I think nutrition has come a long way. I think that,
Oh man.
but
Yeah.
it's still,
What were you eating? I mean, we have this stuff that, you guys were crushing it before there was like this finely engineered thing in a little pouch. Were you
yeah.
just making stuff?
Oh, well, I remember I wasn't. Luckily, it was like the forefront of like goo, luckily.
Okay.
And that was really, I had to learn to really like that. And I know a lot of people have options now, and they look at me like, when
Yeah.
I try to give advice, they're like, well, I can't do that. I'm like, well, you have to do that. I still
Yeah.
think that myself, well, no,
Yeah.
that's what you have to have. And luckily,
Yeah.
other guys, there were people dabbling, making, brown rice syrup gels, and
Yeah.
trying to, like, we would load up like ridiculous amounts of carbs. Everybody was trying something a little bit different, and that was really the beginning of now what you see with how formulated stuff is, and stuff's so much better for your stomach, and the science behind it, and being out there for so many hours. I mean, kudos to so many other industries of endurance sports
Yeah.
to help with that. But yeah, it was. I mean, there's so much trial and error, so many races won and lost on nutrition that it's, that still hasn't changed for a lot of people though. Like that's one of
Yeah.
the key components. Obviously, you talk about the mental side of things, and nutrition is still so huge, and being able to
Yeah.
stay up on that throughout. I
Yeah.
mean, I'm sure those early years probably hardened me to a lot of other things, but I also think I was pretty lucky. I ran with a lot of guys that could never figure out the stomach issues, like could never do
Mm.
it, and
Mm.
that was
Yeah.
really hard.
Yeah.
So,
Well, before I ask you sort of the money question about late race survival, I'm super curious as a father myself of two sons and one daughter. You've spoken fondly of your dad on several occasions in this. And so I'm just curious about, maybe even just broadly speaking, tell me about your dad. Like what did
oh
he
yeah,
do for work? And what have you taken into fatherhood with you? Just because I'm also a student of other fathers.
totally. Oh well, he worked downtown in downtown Denver, and we lived probably 30 miles out. He was an engineer.
Okay.
And he worked, we talked about it the other day. Like he got up at like 5-ish in the morning, and he would make the trek downtown and be to work, and then he'd be home at 7. And for a number of years, he'd take a bus in, and then,
Hmm.
and then
Wow.
after a while, he started riding his bike every day. And I remember that about him. Like,
Dang.
so he would ride his bike into work and then ride home. And, there were times where he was also running, at lunchtime to get ready for certain things. He was big. I was involved in scouting. I was an Eagle Scout. We spent
Okay.
many, many weekends in the mountains and hiking, and we would go on long distance bike rides together. I think, and he was a great athlete too. So
Hmm.
that was always encouraged. But playing sports was always encouraged. He helped out on basketball teams and soccer coaching, um,
Yeah. That's
and I
awesome.
think that like that dedication, and he was always around, and he was always there to be able to uh, I think as a parent, it is really hard. Um, you want to have your kids do their own thing and be independent, and you
Yeah.
want them not to have troubles in life. You don't want to see them be disappointed, and you don't want them sad. But there's a point where you also have to be a parent. You have to direct, and you have to be able to guide them, even though
Yeah.
their minds want to do so many other different things. And I think that now that's helped me say that, well, sports, being part of a community, learning sportsmanship, following a routine, all these things are really good. And I try to, and I guess I'm leaning more on that now with my kids,
Yeah.
as they get older, and they enjoy doing a lot of the things that I've enjoyed doing, and they see it a little bit
Nice.
more. I'm hesitant to go all in and be like, oh well, you should be a runner, and I've kind of kept that from them to a certain
Yeah.
degree,
They
but
they
they
probably hang out with you
they're
at the store. They'll get it through osmosis if it's
oh,
for
oh,
them.
definitely. Oh, 100-mile races are just something to say, which is kind of crazy, like
Yeah.
to even
Yeah.
have that, in the back of your head. So, but
Totally. Totally. Well, that's
um,
great. Let me ask you this just in the wind up here in the final few minutes. This is sort of the question that I'm in pursuit of. Like I've tried 8 100 milers. I've only finished one out of 8. I'm going back. I'm going to run Zion next month. And so sort of the whole premise of this podcast season 1 has been late race survival. And so I've just been talking to everybody I can about this question. Like there's no doubt on multiple occasions you're late in the race of a 100 miler. And let's say it's one that you don't think that you have a chance at winning. Right? I can see the competitiveness like motivating you to go forward. But if you're out of the running, let's say, for example, and you're at this intersection of quit or keep going. So many times I've chosen to quit, and I don't want to do that again. And I'm just curious, in those moments, Hal Koerner, how do you keep going?
oh man, yeah. that's a great question too. And I tried to marinate on this a little bit. You're right. The pull forever was like pretty competition based for me, to
Yeah.
see where I stacked up. And whether that was at the front, I don't, I think that it's also a matter of like you're tackling a course or you're tackling, for me, a lot of the times it came down to the amount of time that I'd put into something. There was still a lesson to be learned for being out there. And
Mm.
that's easier said than done, right? In
Sure.
that moment. But I think that was part of the mental game for me too, was trying to get to where, all that added up to, there were so many worse places and worse things I could be doing than where I was. And there were people doing worse things in worse places than where I was, and probably
Yeah.
feeling worse, than what I was actually feeling in that moment. And that was kind of the mental edge of like, okay, I'm extremely privileged to be out here. And
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
would, even at the start line of certain races, even if my fellow competitors would be like, well, this is the greatest day ever. I get to go run for an entire day in the mountains, man. And I get to go
Yeah.
be in the trees, and I'm going to get killer views, and I'm going to be, I'm going to feel a runner's high. But I'm also going to go through these lows.
Right.
But the beautiful part is I knew it can come back around. And, I'm
Yeah.
still trying to figure out that today I would still like to know, and I was talking to a friend the other day about it. It's like some days you just go out there and it's the greatest day running you ever had, and it was nothing like yesterday. You didn't think today would ever come. Like you didn't think today could be as great as it is after what just happened yesterday, and it is. And
Yeah, good
and
point.
luckily, if you're running an ultra marathon and you're running through days, it can come back around as well. I truly
Yeah.
believe that. I mean, barring
Mm.
really hurting yourself, and
Right.
having terrible injuries, that's, I can be, I could be very disappointed with, my position in the race or how I trained, or, I would sabotage my races all the time. I'd stay up late, or I'd forget
Oh
booze at this
yeah.
drop bag, or I would leave through there and
Yes.
say, I'm not filling a water bottle, I'm so good. And then an hour
Oh man.
later,
Yeah.
and,
What the
but
hell was
those
I
were on
thinking?
me,
Yeah. Yeah.
and those things were on me. And I was like, well, if I can control these things now, and we can get back, then this is what I have to do. But it was all
Mm.
a learning process too, to where,
Yeah.
these things are, not everybody can do these things. And it does take that extra little bit for sure to figure it
Yeah.
out, to get it dialed in. But it's, those things that, ultimately there was no better place I felt I could be. And that changes with everybody
Mm.
throughout your life and what you're dealing with, and
Mm.
what your commitments are and what your priorities are. But that was the purest thing that I had, and I still think I have that, which is why I
Yeah.
love the sport and
Man,
being out there.
that's awesome to think. Like if I'm in that position, like for me, wherever that struggle comes, I can either remain out in the Zion Desert, which is my favorite place on earth, like literally, or I
Yep.
can go to my Airbnb duplex. I think that's an interesting perspective to say that even in the suffering, I would rather be, in the red dirt of Zion than out suffering. I think that's a good place uh, to wrap. I know that you've got
Shoot.
commitments this morning, but Hal, it's been a real treat, and I thank
Oh,
you for it, and I look forward to doing it again sometime.
oh, thank you so much. It was great. It's
Yeah,
wonderful getting to meet you too and
yeah,
talk
man.
about our favorite thing. No question.
Right on, right on.
Right.
Hey, have a good day, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks, Josh.
All right, dude. See you.